Okay, folks, we are going to get started on Unit 3 of our AP review. This one is on the land-based empires. There's a lot of extra information in here on Europe and Russia, which will be valuable for you as comparison, but the big focus out of this one is on the three empires in front of you here: the Mughal Empire of India, Safavid Empire of what became modern-day Persia and Iran, and the Ottoman Empire. And of the three, the Safavid is probably the least important, as you'll see going forward. All right, so we're going to look at their expansion and the expansion of imperial rule, not just in these three, but also we're going to look a little bit at Europe and a lot at Russia and the Chinese, the Ming and Qing dynasties also. Okay, so gunpowder empires gained power by the use of gunpowder weapons, and they were, as I've already said, the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Mughal Empire, moving left to right on your screen, as they say in the football games. But we're going to start with Europe, because Europe is beginning to, in this period of 1450, is beginning to rise out of the torpor of the Dark Ages. They've recovered from the plague, and Europe over this period will really begin to exert dominance on the rest of the globe, as we're going to see in Unit 4 and then going forward in Unit 5 and 6. The printing press has a big part in this because it makes the written word more accessible, which means people are more literate, more educated, and information is more easily passed about stuff. Now, to make the printing press work, you have to have paper, and that paper technology came from China. The monarchies of Europe began to get stronger at this point in time. You start to have a development of states, especially in the back half of the period in 1650 and beyond, and a lot of it was driven by competition between the states, not only within Europe because they're so closely together, but also for overseas trade in the Far East of India and China, but also later in the Americas. And on top of this, you have this rise of a middle class of city dwellers, rising a lot because of the result of trade, and their power really grows because they are the ones who have the money to pay for the king, to finance and give loans to kings so that they can go and fight wars to increase territory and make themselves more powerful. Okay, Russia, kind of divorced from Europe at this point in time, but gradually through the efforts of Peter the Great will begin to try to become more part of Russia. Ivan the Terrible is really one of the first great czars of the Russias, one of the first ones to really show up on the radar screen outside of Russian history. He's Ivan IV, also called the Terrible, and he is the guy who brings the feudal system and serfdom to Russia that will remain there till the 1860s. He is a mean, nasty piece of work, and that is where he got his name, the Terrible. It wasn't because he was a bad ruler, it's because he was a mean ruler. The Russians, beginning with Ivan and then moving onward, begin conquering and expanding to the south and especially to the east across Siberia. And as they go, they Russify people, turning them into Russians, converting them to Orthodox Christianity and bringing in Russian culture. They established a tribute system which requires payment, and it's usually in furs. The fur trade becomes a major staple of the Russian economy. But as they expand, just like when the rest of the Europeans came into the Americas, they bring epidemic disease with them, and it kills many people, especially in Siberia. Not so much to the territories of the south because they've been more exposed through trade, but Siberia is kind of virgin territory and had been kind of cut off from the rest of the trade networks. Okay. Moving on to China. You have two dynasties in China during this period. You have the Ming dynasty, which we met when they took over and they overthrew the Mongols. The Ming is an ethnic Chinese dynasty. As you can see, they're the people that live in this eastern part of China, excluding this part in the northwest really, are ethnic Chinese. The Ming becomes more inward looking after the ending of the voyages of Zheng He. And they reestablished the Confucian civil service system, and that helps contribute to ending the voyages of Zheng He, which we talked about in the last unit. The Qing dynasty is not Chinese. They are Manchurian. Manchuria is this territory up here in the northwestern part of China, and they eventually conquered China. and really go native much more than the Mongols did. They really make a concerted effort to become Chinese. They are expansionist. They bring much of Central Asia. All this territory in the bright white, okay, is brought under control of China by the Ming Dynasty. Tibet down here in the south, Mongolia in this territory here, and Xinjiang up here in the northwest. And they really create the borders of modern China. Okay, a little bit more on two of the more notable empires of the Qing. You have the Empire Kangxi. He was anti-Western. He actually had kind of a crusade against Christian missionaries, trying to prevent in his mind, the pollution of a Chinese culture. This will come back to play. This issue will come up many times during the course of the Qing dynasty. And then you have the Emperor Qianlong, who serves really towards the end of this period, 1750, when the British are trying to make inroads into China to establish trade. He rejects all of their entreaties. Basically says China doesn't need your Western junk. We got everything we need. And this eventually will lead to a series of trade wars in the 19th century, the most famous of which is the Opium War, which leaves the British victorious, and the British extract severe trade concessions from the Chinese, leading to that century of downfall that we talked about when we were talking about China and the spheres of influence. We'll get into all of that in period 5 and 6. All right, back to kind of the gunpowder empires. Okay, as you can see, again, I have the map up behind them. They have a lot of similarities. They're all Islamic, all absolute monarchs. The Ottomans and Mughals practiced religious tolerance. The Safavids really depended on the monarch. They're all Turkic in descent, so they descended from nomadic tribes up here in the north, kind of the central parts of Asia. They are not Arabic, Persian, or Indian, though they certainly become that. And they're really the descendants of a man called Tamerlane, or Timur the Lame, who is a great-grandson of Genghis Khan, who for a brief little period burst out of Central Asia, conquered a great deal of India, and what is now becomes the Safavid Empire. He's really the forerunner of the Turkic tribes that come down out of Central Asia, convert to Islam, and come to rule the gunpowder empires. Okay, some comparison here, okay, of where they were and who was their best, more important leaders, and a little bit on the decline. That we'll get into some of the decline, especially the Ottomans later, and a little bit the Mughals when we get talking about the imperial period. The Ottomans, as we know, are Middle East, North Africa, Southeastern Europe. Their two key rulers are Mehmet the Conqueror, who is the guy who actually captures Constantinople and ends the Byzantine Empire. But the most significant is Suleiman the Magnificent. He expanded the empire to its largest extent, almost taking control of Central Europe, but doesn't quite get it done. And his other nickname was the Lawgiver, and he revitalized and redid the whole law code of the Ottoman Empire, combining in some Sharia law and some other parts. The Ottoman Empire is Sunni Islamic, and they really, after that loss in Central Europe at the gates of Vienna in 1683, they begin a long decline and eventually will collapse after World War I. The Safavids are located in modern-day Iran or Persia. Their most famous ruler is Shah Abbas. He really had a golden age where there was a lot of cultural blending with the Ottomans and the Arabs. The Persians became famous for their carpet making, and he instituted military reform and modernization. And the Safavids are different from the Sunnis and the Mughals in that they are Shia Islamic, and we'll get into that split in a little bit. Their decline really came from infighting in the royal family, encroachment by Ottomans and other Afghani tribes on the eastern side. But really, the Safavid Empire really continues on through the modern era and is eventually overthrown in 1979 with the last Shah. And then you have the Mughals in India. Their great leader was Akbar the Great. He practiced religious toleration. He was the original conqueror of most of India. Really ruled very well and did a lot. We'll get a little bit more into him a little bit later. Sadly, one of his descendants is Aurangzeb, who basically undoes everything he did, and he installs much stricter Islamic laws, reinstates attacks on non-believers, persecuted non-Muslims. And this is a problem because, as you notice, under religion, they are Sunni Islamic, but they are only 20% of the population, so they are ruling over a vast majority of predominantly Hindus who begin to push back against this. And after Aurangzeb's death, they really push back, and this weakens the Mughal Empire, and it leaves India open for the British to come in and take over. Okay, now we will move on to topic 3.2.